Welcome to this ACEMS virtual public lecture, Statistical Methodology Development and Software Dissemination. Before proceeding, I want to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which I live and currently work, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, who've been custodians of this land for thousands of years. I pay my respects to their elders past and present, and to Indigenous communities who might be online today. Please note that this lecture will be recorded and made available on the ACEMS website. The ACEMS website is www.acems.org.au. And for those of you unfamiliar with ACEMS, ACEMS is the Australian Research Council Centre of Excellence for Mathematical and Statistical Frontiers. My name's Tim Garoni. I'm a Chief Investigator with ACEMS, and I'm the Deputy Director responsible for outreach. And I'm very pleased to be able to introduce Matt Want as today's speaker. Matt is a distinguished professor of statistics at the University of Technology, Sydney, and a fellow chief investigator with ACEMS. He has previously held faculty positions at Harvard, Rice, Texas A&M, UNSW, and the University of Wollongong. In 2008, Matt became an elected fellow of the Australian Academy of Science. He's also an elected fellow of the American Statistical Association, the Institute of Mathematical Statistics, and the Australian Mathematical Society. Matt's received a number of prestigious awards, including the Moran Medal in 1997, both the Hannan and Pittman Medals in 2013. Now, at the end of Matt's presentation, we'll be taking questions. Please use the Q&A button on the bottom of your screen if you'd like to post questions. And without further ado, I'd like to invite Matt to speak to us about statistical methodology development and software dissemination. Take it away.
All right, so thank you, Tim. Yeah, so we're going to talk about statistical methodology at the start, but then mainly get into software dissemination after that. So we'll start with a statistical methodology problem, which I saw has room for improvement, especially when it comes to scalability. And the problem is known as generalized additive model selection. So this is not really what the talk's about, but it's going to be used as an illustration. If you do want to find out more about this topic and related ones, this is a must-have book for every statistician and data analyst in the world. And I spent a lot of the 2010s writing this book with my co-authors. And this is how I learnt about generalized additive model selection, which I have to say I didn't know a lot about when I started writing the book, that particular aspect of generalized additive models. So with my student, Virginia He, we're building on a paper that one of the, I guess, the fathers of generalized additive models, Trevor Hastie at Stanford, and one of his students published in 2015 to obtain new, accurate and scalable generalized additive model selection statistical methodology. They didn't use any Bayesian type ideas, whereas we're using tools such as Markov chain, Monte Carlo, and mean field variational Bayes in our approach. So one example of many where this methodology could be applied is this one concerning mortgage applications and whether or not they're denied or accepted. So it's a spreadsheet with about 2,300 rows and 20 columns. And you feed the data into our algorithm, and it decides whether each of those 20 predictors is either 0, has a linear effect, or a nonlinear effect. So here's the results from our new approach. So we have the 20 candidate predictors here on the screen, and various like attributes of the applicant and sort of banking type things such as loan size to property value ratio. And the summary from our analysis with our new methodology is that out of 20 candidate predictors, we have quickly selected 5 predictors as having a linear effect on mortgage application denial, 2 predictors as having a nonlinear effect that we'll talk about in a moment, and then we can throw away the other 13 predictors as irrelevant. So the more interesting ones are the ones here in red, the ones that have nonlinear effects. So this involves using ideas such as cubic splines and panelization. And you can see that you have the, sort of these interesting U-shaped type effects for these banking terms such as debt payment to income ratio. And if this was a banking and finance talk, which it isn't, then we could, try to understand why this sort of thing might be happening. But for now, I just want to point out that, our book and a lot of my methodology is concerned with ways in which you can incorporate nonlinear effects like the one shown here on the screen. And, if you go back to the 1980s, when generalized linear models were the main tool for analysing such data, they would just assume that these effects are straight lines. And you can see that by allowing for the additive model extension, we are getting some interesting nonlinear effects coming in. All right, so I'm going to give just one slide that compares our new methodology to some of the other methodology of this type that's floating around. And it's going to be side-by-side box plots where lower means better, and it's for misclassification rate of the effect types. So we've got various sample sizes and noise levels. So if we just sort of focus on this one, we have a lower sample size of about 500 and a higher noise level. These box plots correspond to the performance of our methodology using Markov chain Monte Carlo or the faster variational method. This one corresponds to a very good methodology known as spike slab GAM, although it is quite slow and not really scalable. Now, this one is the hasty and student approach, which does really poorly if you just only use the default settings. So Hasty and co would probably argue, well, you need to go and fiddle around with various cross-validation choice grids and the like. And we do plan to do that, but for this simulation study, we just simply threw in the default values. All right, so coming soon to a web page near you, Bayesian generalized additive model selection, including a fast variational option by Virginia, he, and myself. And I'm just going to have a few more slides on this paper before I get to the software part. So the centerpiece of this new paper is its algorithm listings. And there are a few things that I love more than deriving and listing algorithms. So this has every little step that you need to get those pictures that we had and that output that we had a bit earlier. And here's a bit more. This is actually the Markov chain Monte Carlo algorithm. And then this is the variational Bayes algorithm. So it tells you what to initialize, it tells you what to update, it tells you when to stop iterating. And after going to the trouble to do all this, when the paper comes out, our goal is to allow the readers to implement our new statistical methodology, regardless of what language they like to use. So we're just using generic algorithm type notation. And whether or not you're into Julia or MATLAB or Python, the idea is that you can take this sort of stuff and get it working. Now, the last programming language on the list, just simply the letter R, that I know many in the audience know about, but maybe not everyone. This is the one that is such that, at least now in 2021, I think it dominates the others in terms of use in statistical analyses, you know, mainly in applied statistics, but also in statistical methodological development. I think that's the case. I'm not totally sure, or haven't, you know, tried to like verify it with data or anything. So if you don't use R, but you're into Python, for example, you know, I'll just sort of say now, I don't know enough about Python to really speak to Python software dissemination. And most of the rest of this talk will be concerned with the R language. All right, so just a reminder about our new paper, Bayesian Generalized Additive Model Selection, including a fast variational option, coming soon to a web page near you. All right, so I'm just going to have a small drink while we get ready for the next part, and you can like reflect on what I've been saying and like read the current slide. Okay, but there's more. We didn't just write a paper. We have an accompanying R package. So in the next month or two, we're planning to release an R package named Gamcell Bayes that implements the algorithms that I just showed a few slides ago. Plus, we'll throw in a vignette. So this is not as common, but whenever you do an R package, which we'll talk about soon, which is like pretty much just a software module for a particular type of statistical methodology, you can also add in like a PDF file that works through various examples and illustrates how to use the package and you know, various parameters and, you know, the effect of choosing them and the like. So, new statistical methodology done the easy way. Any R user will soon be able to download the Gamcell R package from the internet, start an R session, set up the response data vector, which we'll call Y, set up predictor data matrices that we call X linear and X general. And these can be quite big, you know, that, you know, just put X, it's all right to have X general with like a couple of 100,000 rows and a couple of 100 columns. We can handle that sort of thing. That's how scalable we think our methodology is. Then just issue 3 or 4 lines of R commands and then sit back and marvel at their newly selected generalized additive model. So much easier than coding it yourself and doing all the graphics and so on yourself. All right, so life wasn't always like this. So we're now going to sort of do a little bit of a history lesson. And, you know, we're now into the 3rd millennium, but we're going to go back and look at what life was like in some of the earlier millennia. And we're going to go back 2021 summers ago to the year 0,000. So back in the year 0,000, of course, we had Caesar Augustus as the first emperor of Rome, getting around the various like Roman Empire towns. It came in handy to like have a donkey and some sandals. And if somebody special had a birthday, then what better than some frankincense or myrrh? And after that, we had the 1st millennium. All right, so now we'll move to the year 1000. And like during the last part of the 1st millennium, for example, the Vikings figured out how to build good enough boats to make it from Europe to North America. And so around the year 1000, we had Eric the Red and his fellow Vikings colonizing Greenland. And then, of course, the throne on which Elizabeth II sits now was being occupied by Ethelred the Unready. But he should have been getting ready soon, because in 66 years' time, there's going to be a big battle up the road in Hastings. All right, so then we had the second millennium. And I'll talk about this in a moment. So the year 2000. And if you're not a millennial, you might remember some of these things. So we had Sydney hosting the Summer Olympic Games. We had Al Gore getting very close to becoming the United States president, but probably losing it because of so-called butterfly ballots in Palm Beach County. We also had, on the 29th of February 2000, the Comprehensive Archive Network being officially launched. We also had the John M. Chambers Statistical Software Award having its first recipients. So in some ways, the change of the millennia, going from the second to the third, has been a sea change in terms of, the internet being very young, just old enough for the Comprehensive Archive Network to be started. And we're having awards that recognise, software dissemination. All right, so I'm from the second millennium. I was born back then. I did all my education back then. And I had the first 15 or so years of my research career back in the second millennium. So, back in those days, there was no such thing as the internet. Email was only just getting started. And yeah, we did have software. It wasn't as good as a lot of the software that I did in my PhD wasn't as friendly as R. Graphics was pretty painful. And dissemination was very, very casual, if it happened at all. So this is my first paper in the Journal of the American Statistical Association. And despite my youthful looks, it came out 30 years ago, in 1991. And, I'd forgotten about this. So I did remember, I had a look at it as part of preparing this talk, and I'd forgotten about, I'd forgotten a lot about this paper, but I did remember that we had listed an algorithm. Here it is. So this is the algorithm from our JASA, Journal of the American Statistical Association paper 30 years ago. It's got a few quirks. I like step 2, where you have to raise a number to the power of 1/13. So then I try to remember why that particular power came into it. But that is indeed what's needed as part of our 1991 algorithm. Some of the steps here are pretty easy, but this step here about setting a good finite grid actually was a lot of work that my co-author Steve Marin had to do, to code to do a good job. And this algorithm, if you want to do it as well as we did back in 1991, it would take quite a bit of work. And my guess is that not too many people have used this methodology as intended, because we never packaged it. And I don't know if anybody else has ever packaged it. So that's how things were back in, back around 30 years ago. All right, so now we're in the third millennium, where software dissemination is much easier because of things such as the Comprehensive Archive Network. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time now talking about what it's like to do that. This is very much a personal viewpoint, just based on my experiences. So what I say doesn't maybe translate to all the other people around the world writing R packages, but it's my public lecture, and I thought I'd just sort of share how it has been for me. All right, so we'll start with the one sentence summary. So I would say for me, writing a dissemination ready R package is very time consuming, extremely tedious, but ultimately rewarding. All right, so let's give a bit more detail on that. And I've been doing this since around 2010. So here's how I tend to do it. It's important for me to keep a to-do list of all the things that I want to add to the package, and it's constantly changing. Like I keep on thinking of things to add, and then when I add them, cross it off, but the list tends to constantly grow and eventually diminish. I have in the last few years started using the GitHub version control system. I've always been a user of Unix, and I personally can't imagine managing my package without it. It's important, I feel, to do lots of tests on simulated data, as well as then trying it out on actual data and having new surprises that you have to deal with. A big one is hunting down bugs. So that can, about 2 weeks ago, I probably spent the whole afternoon just hunting down one missing line of code that was needed to get everything working well. So then there's putting in safeguards, trying to make the software more professional, if you like, so that if you put in wrong numbers or wrong inputs, things don't go haywire. Another one is testing for boundary cases. So you might write a package that, everything's fine when you have 50 predictors in the model. But if you have 1 or 0, things start crashing due to peculiarities of the R language. So I found that things like that are important. Making the graphics professional. Then you've got to do the documentation, which can take very many hours to do for an R package. If you decide to do a vignette, and I guess I have sort of decided that I like to do that because I think it makes the package better. That takes time. And then it seems like you do have to have a paper these days. There was a time where you could just put a package on R, but now they seem like they want a paper that goes with it. And then you can have a lot of fun making sure that the package meets the standards required for putting on the network. And lastly, you need to get past the human beings that are gatekeepers for the comprehensive archive network. And after doing all that, you've got yourself a user-ready R package. All right, so I've done that about 5 times where I've been the main programmer. I've got a few packages that I'm part of where I'm not the main programmer. I've also written about 100 statistics methodology papers. So what I thought I'd do for this talk, and this is really rough, is just think about things, and I'm working on a package right now, about how much effort is needed for a dissemination-ready R package compared to writing a reasonable statistics methodology paper. And, there's lots of different levels of papers. This is talking in averages. And I've come up with the number 2. There's fairly wide error bars on this, but I'm going to say today that it's about 2 stats methods papers per R package. That's how long it takes to put together a good R package. So if I didn't write those 5 R packages, then I may have around 10 extra not really top tier, but reasonable stats methodology or theory papers extra. So this is my personal experience only. All right, so now let's start talking about pros and cons of writing a polished software module for dissemination. All right, so here are the pros that I thought of. So the first one is, pretty important one. If you submit a paper to a journal, methodological paper, and you can tell everybody or tell the reviewers that there's an R package that goes with it, I'd like to think that that's going to be seen favourably by the reviewers, looked upon favourably by the reviewers, and help its chances of acceptance. Of course, the whole reason for doing statistical methodology is that people use it. So you could argue that, this is something you should definitely consider doing. You do have an additional little thing you can throw on your CV, and it will probably later on lead to better citation rates because people use the methodology more. All right, so some of the cons. One is, you get fewer papers if you're spending all this time doing R packages that take time away from writing papers. And I happen to be on a performance bonus, and I've even had deans say to me, we didn't think you wrote as many papers last year as we thought you might. And so if I've got deans saying that sort of thing to me, then you could argue that I shouldn't be spending as much time packaging my research. Also, when you apply for grants, say with the Australian Research Council, there's a lot of paper counting that goes on with that. And my superiors in my school and faculty are non-statisticians who don't know an R package from a bar of soap. So I can tell them, I wrote this great R package that's on this comprehensive R archive network, but they don't really know what it means, I don't think, and they're more interested in how many papers and grants I have. And then there's things like job offers, promotions, prizes, fellowships, and the like that are more oriented towards papers. So then I said I'd have a look at some lists of, to see whether that sort of thing sort of matches, say, prizes. So this is sometimes called the Nobel Prize of Statistics. It's the main prize for somebody under 40 in the whole field, called the Committee of Presidents of Statistical Societies Award. And these are the last 10 winners. And most of them have gotten this prize not for software, but more for theory and methodology and the like. The two with the stars had done a lot of software. In fact, the 2019 winner, Hadley Wickham, is very famous for his software work. And then I went to the Guy Medal in Gold, which is the main award for the Royal Statistical Society, the British Statistical Society. And these are the last 10 winners of that. And again, they're mainly people that you sort of think of in terms of methodology and theory. But then I remembered David Spiegelhall, to the 2020 winner, he's one of the people behind the BUG software, which stands for Bayesian Inference Using Gibbs Sampling. And then John Nelder, who's one of the fathers or the inventors of the generalized linear models, he was actually involved in software back in the 70s known as GLIM. So he didn't just invent the statistical methodology. He said we need to find ways in which people can use it through GLIM. Top 10 publishers in the Annals of Statistics, Biometrica, JASA, and Journal of the Royal Statistical Society Series B. All right, so none of these, as far as I know, do software dissemination. They're too busy publishing their latest Annals or JASA paper. This is a little bit of a frivolous list, but when I saw it, the first thing that struck me is that number 1 is my PhD supervisor, and number 2 is my first boss. And back in the early stages of my career, these two guys used to make me pretty small, used to make me feel pretty small about how fast they used to pump out the papers. But now I can see that they were pretty special people. All right, so how about software dissemination recognition? And when I first agreed to give this talk, I didn't think there was such a list, but then I looked around the web a bit and I saw that, yeah, there is this thing known as the John M. Chambers Award, which I think I probably had heard of, but I hadn't really quite resonated with me. And so these are the last 10 winners of that. And I was very pleased to see that we even have somebody in our Centre of Excellence, Iro Wang, who won it 2 years ago. So now we do have lists, at least for software dissemination, that goes with things like the Committee of Presidents Award and the Guy Medal. All right, so after this talk first got advertised, I got contacted by our industry liaison person, Angela, and she put me in touch with somebody on my campus named Tom Honeyman. And he pointed out there's this entity called the Australian Research Data Commons. And you can find this pretty easily on the web. So it has this page here that I'm just showing, which advertises a research software agenda for Australia and recognising research software as a first-class output of research. All right, so there are things happening that maybe, are recognising the importance of software dissemination as opposed to the more traditional research outputs. All right, so one last topic. I'll just get another drink of water. Who are the heroes and role models? All right, so I want to thank people that have put a lot of work on R. I don't know who's put a lot of work into Python and Julia and MATLAB, so I'll thank those as well, but I don't know their names. But since I work in R, I'm going to try to thank some of the people. But the list that's going to come up on the next slide is very ad hoc and far from complete. So it's just kind of like a list of people I thought of when I was making the slide. I did do a few, looked at things like the R core team and the bioconductor core team. So I'm worried that, there's people watching this talk that think that they should be on the list, but they're not. So I'll apologize right now for leaving you off if that's happened. So this is a list that I came up with. And we'll start off on the top left-hand column, and these are the Australians. So these are colleagues here in Australia, including some in ACEMS, such as Rob Hyman. And so these are people that I've noticed, do a lot of work on R packaging and software dissemination. And underneath those, we have the New Zealanders. And those of you that don't know much about R or hadn't even heard of it before this talk, if you said, if you were asked like, where did R start? You might think, somewhere like near Silicon Valley or the San Francisco Bay Area, or maybe Toronto or New York or London or Berlin. All those answers are wrong. R started in Auckland, New Zealand. So R started by our cross-Tasman cousins over in New Zealand. In fact, it's called R because of Ross Ihaka and Robert Gentleman, who was in New Zealand at the time, but he's no longer there. So New Zealand have punched above their weight and continue to punch above their weight when it comes to software dissemination. So then I decided to make a list of people that I'm grateful to for my areas of research, which are things like generalized linear mixed models and non-parametric regression. Like I don't do a lot of like time series research. So, if you've written the world's best package for time series, then I'm sorry that you're not on this list because I haven't really used it. but I'm grateful for people like Depay and Saka for writing the lattice package, and Trevor Hasty for his work on GAMSL, and Doug Bates for his work on mixed model software. And in the last 2 years, I've started using the RCPP and RCPP Armadillo packages by Dirk Edelbudel. I also use RStan a lot. All right. So just to sort of close things off now, so I don't go to the joint statistical meetings very often, but I did actually go to the 2019 ones in Denver. This was actually the last normal joint statistical meetings before the pandemic started. And I was pleased to see that my friend Trevor Hasty was delivering the 2019 Wall Memorial Lectures. So obviously I went along and watched them all. And Trevor's also one of my main role models. And anyway, he said obviously many things over the 3 hours, but this is one thing that he did say for sure, that he believes that it's very important to software package new methodology, otherwise it tends to fade away. So I did actually take that comment seriously and have tried even harder since mid-2019 to package my new methodology, because I don't want it to fade away. All right, so I put the abstract together about a month ago when I was first asked to give the lecture. And then I started putting the talk together, and then just towards the end, a couple of hours ago, I thought I'd better check to see whether I, addressed all the questions that I said I would. So I guess I did, address one about R package writing and give some answers, and the one about heroes and role models. The one about reward systems, I guess I flagged it as an issue, but I haven't really come up with any really good answers yet. And maybe the discussion can lead to some ideas on that. So even though I said I'd address it, I haven't really answered it or anything. I've just sort of put it out as an issue without a lot of answers. So I'll end the public lecture here and open up for discussion according to what my host Tim says next to do.
Thanks very much, Matt. It was a really interesting talk. So we do have quite a number of comments and questions in the Q&A. If anybody has any more, feel free to keep adding them. So let me try and work our way through them. So I guess the first question, Matt, I'm curious to know when you start writing a package. When does that happen for you in relation to the point at which you conceive of the ideas embodied in the package?
Yeah, so one thing is it has to be sort of modular. Like some of my papers that I guess you would class as statistical methodology aren't sort of self-standing modular type things that make sense to have as an R package. I mean, I could give you examples, but it probably get a bit too technical at this point. Whereas the one that I used at the start of the talk with my student Virginia, that is something that I could see, yes, this is something that's going to have just a few key functions and support functions, then it is modular enough to package. So that's sort of, I guess that's kind of my thinking with it. So maybe I'll just leave my answer at that.
Okay, thanks. So Louise has a couple of questions. Maybe I'll try and join them together. So the first is, I guess, a comment that it's hard for Louise to see so few female names listed amongst the GE medal winners, etc., that you listed. And then the follow-up question to you, Matt, is what can we do proactively to get more women actively engaged and more prominent in these areas? What do you think the barriers are?
Yeah, all right. Well, yeah, it's a good question. Like that question, that slide where I listed lots of people, you know, sadly, it was hard to find female names. Like, you know, you sort of go through like the R core team. I don't know if that had any female names at all. I don't have a lot of great answers off the cuff. I am supervising women, young women, and sort of teaching them about how I do things, and maybe that's one pathway to getting the outcomes that Louise is talking about. We had in the Statistics Society a few months ago, we had the R Ladies group come and give a talk to us here in Sydney. So, you know, if there's opportunities for me to, as a senior person working in this sort of area, or other males like me to work with the R Ladies group, that's another possibility. But yeah, they're just some off the cuff ideas that I have about it.
Yeah, it's obviously a tricky question. So a quick one, do you have any YouTube channels or blogs or magazines that you would recommend to follow new trends in this area?
YouTube channels, blogs,
magazines, I guess any kind of media. What would you recommend?
Yeah, I'm not really into those sort of things personally, blogs and the like. I mean, I watch YouTube for like watching rock bands that I was into back in the 70s, but not so much for work. I mean, I know that one of the people that was on that slide for the big software list is Andrew Gelman, who's probably the most senior person on the RSTAN package that I sort of advertised. So he has a blog. So the Andrew Gelman blog at Columbia University in New York is one that sort of springs to mind. As for magazines and YouTube, yeah, I can't think of any that I know about, but I'm sure that lots of the people tuned in this talk, particularly the millennials, would have good answers. I'm too old. I'm from the second millennium.
Well, if anybody does want to suggest things, just pop them in the Q&A. So I guess this is more of a comment, but surprised Yu Hui Ji, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, isn't on the list. I'm not sure which list, but
yeah. Well, luckily I put that apology in because I'm sure I left out dozens and maybe hundreds of people.
Okay, next question. What are your thoughts on the relatively new field / profession of research software engineering?
Yeah. Sorry, just before I go to that question, like with the previous question, I just got invited to give this talk at the Stats Society for New South Wales. I think it's going to be the 10th of November. So if anybody, you know, who's watched this talk feels like that there's very important names left off, I'm very happy to fix up that part of this talk. So can you just repeat that now, please, Tim?
Yeah. What are your thoughts on the new field of research software engineering?
New field of software
software
engineering. Yeah, I haven't really thought about it because I don't think I even know about it.
Yeah, I hadn't heard of it.
Yeah. So as of right now, no thoughts since I didn't know about it.
Okay, so here's an interesting question. Doesn't the increased emphasis on impact, I guess coming from the federal government, AIC, etc., help with the rewards from software development?
Yeah, so I hope yes. So I put in for an Australian Research Council grant back last summer, and for the first time I was brave enough to put in software, a software contribution as opposed to writing papers. it's a bit of a risk, but the referees did seem to like it. I'll find out in a few weeks' time whether it worked when they do the announcements. So I'm hoping there's a bit of a shift there. I wouldn't have done it like around the year 2010, but I have started doing it around the year 2020. And so I guess I've just sort of detected some sort of sea change there, that you can maybe have better chances of grant funding. But I still worry that it's not enough, compared to like how many papers you need in good journals. And I don't have a good answer for that right now.
So the next question is actually related to something I was going to ask. I think it's phrased in more detail. What are your thoughts on submitting papers to the Journal of Open Source Software, which is apparently a 1 to 2 page abstract where the code gets publicly reviewed, versus writing code plus test plus documentation plus blah blah?
Yeah, that sounds good to me. I think I may have heard of it, but I hadn't really looked into it. But that might be a good answer to those questions that I put up about recognition and peer review and the like for software contributions. I mean, even though I've said, it's great to write software and so on in this talk, if you play the devil's advocate, you don't want to say to a young person, only write software and you'll get a good job, because software isn't really peer reviewed that much. And, you could have a junior person, writing 10 R packages a year during their PhD and thinking they're going to go walk into a job. That's not really correct, because there are a lot of ordinary R packages out there as well. So there's like 15,000 R packages on the network now, but not all of them are really necessarily high quality work. So that open journal, software journal, might be a good step in terms of recognizing high quality software as opposed to, not very great software.
Okay, another question. How do we train the next generation of statisticians in creating good software?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I've never taught, I've been teaching for 30 odd years, but I've never taught a lot about creating software. And there are times that I thought it would have been good for students in some of my classes to learn more about that. And yeah, I think it would be great if like the program that I'm part of here at UTS, if, we teach them about distributions and, regression models and the like, but it'd be great if we also had more on programming skills and R packaging and the like. So whether there's enough room in curricula to do that easily, I don't really know, but I think that would be a good thing to have in statistics and other mathematical science curricula.
So the next question, well, it's not actually a question, a comment. So the Stat Society of Australia, the Victorian branch, has launched a software award.
Oh, yeah. Good.
And so that might be worth checking out for people interested.
Okay. What's the name of it?
Doesn't actually seem to have an actual name.
Okay.
Formal recognition.
Victorian.
Yeah, the Victorian branch of the Stat Society of Australia.
Okay, good. Yeah, Victoria's Victorian stats is quite strong in terms of software. People like Gordon Smythe and Di Cook and Rob Hyman.
So here's a comment from Rob, actually. Speak of the devil. So on the rewards issue, the Monash Business School now recognises software as a valid research output, and it can contribute towards promotions.
All right.
We have a peer review system to mimic what happens with journal papers.
All right, that's great. I can sort of see that with senior people like Rob. And that's
if Rob's the head of school, that probably helps, right?
Yeah.
So what are your reflections on the opportunity cost associated with maintenance?
Yeah, so I think this question is, I'm going to assume this question is about, like, you write the R package and get it on the network, but then you have to maintain it. And that is quite a painful thing. I mean, I hope I'm answering this question right, but that can be a bit of a pain. So what happens is, and I'm speaking for those of you that haven't done a lot of this sort of R packaging thing, you think that you're done, like you're done with the paper, but then like a year later, you get this message from someone like Brian Ripley, who says, this thing's changed in R and this thing's changed in C++ and so on. And your package depends on this thing that some guy in Uzbekistan has changed in his package, and you need to do this, this, and this to get it back onto the network. So that has been that's a bit of a pain. I haven't found it extremely onerous. I did find it in my early packaging years, I wasn't that good at it, but I've gotten better at R packaging. So yes, there is a bit of a price to be paid, but I'd say it's quite a small fraction compared to how much it takes just to get the package up in the first place.
Another question, do you think there's a place for a consideration of a division of labor or development of specific roles to support the creation of new software?
Yeah, I'd say in a perfect world, that would be good. So for me, as somebody who works in, I guess I like to sort of pride myself that I work in all parts of stats. I still do some theory, I still do applications, methodology and software and computing and the like. I mean, for me personally, I have found it hard to like pass it on to other people. Maybe it's a problem that I've got, like I feel like I've got to own it, and like I can't trust anyone to like take my beautiful methodology and package it a good way. But I think if you have the right people to work with, I can see that you could have better division of labor. And I have had some stories where I have been able to pass it on, and the person's done a great job as well.
Okay, there's a suggestion here for some resources, which I think was referring to a previous question. So education.rstudio.com might be a place to look.
Education.rstudio.com.
Righto. All right, another question. What are good incentives and rewards for contributing to existing packages?
Yeah. So contributing to existing packages. So does that mean that you have to like liaise with the package author and say, I want to make your package better? Yeah, I actually have done that a little bit, in fact, with one of Rob's packages, but I haven't seen that a lot. But I suppose you can always try, emailing a package developer and see if you can join their team, or be a contributor to it. In terms of the rewards, well, you don't even get to put a package on your CV. You get to maybe just put that you're a contributor to a package on a CV, but at least it's something that can be added on.
Yeah. Another suggestion for blogs is rweekly.org.
Rweekly.org.
I'm not sure if this is a comment or a question yet. On applications and reports and such, I report package download counts from the RStudio mirror and trends therein.
Yeah, I haven't learned about that, but I want to try to learn that. So I guess my question is, like if I put a package on CRAN, or Comprehensive Archive Network, which we call CRAN, say in 2010, is it easy for me to find out how many times it's been downloaded? So I can maybe argue, but then it'd be good to sort of know what the average downloads are, and do some sort of comparisons with the other 15,000 packages on the network. But then I guess you'd have to account for time on the network as well. Yeah, it'd be good if that could be automated somehow. Maybe it is, but I haven't looked into it.
Okay, so I see you use RStan for Bayesian modeling. Have you also used the R package BRMS, which provides a front end to RStan?
Yes.
So do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, so I've heard about BRMS. I've even met I think the person that wrote it, Ben, I think his name's Ben Goodridge at Columbia University. And one of our students recently used it in a presentation that I saw. And I actually work in the related area, but I haven't got around to using it much. Oh, maybe I did. I think I did try it once, but I didn't really get back to it. But this is sort of like a front end, the book that I advertised from me and my co-authors at the start of this talk. This is like a front end to doing a lot of the methodology that's described in our book without having to program the RStan part yourself or the Stan part yourself. And I haven't looked into it that closely, but I know about it and looked into it a little bit.
And several people have informed me that I think the award we were talking about before from the Stats Association is called the Di Cook Award.
The Di Cook Award.
Yeah, which I guess we should know about. All right, what's your take on tidyverse from the point of view of other package development?
Yes, so I'm very ignorant of the tidyverse. I've never been in there. I just know it as a term, and I have been to one Hadley Wickham lecture that we had in Sydney, where he explained it about one row per this and one column per that. I'm sort of a bit ignorant of it, and I haven't really gotten into it. I mean, it seems like, well, I might be wrong, but it seems like if you're an industry data scientist, it might be more for that, as opposed to what I do. But that's speaking as somebody that doesn't know much about it and hasn't really thought much about it. So yes, I've heard of the tidyverse, but I don't really know a lot about it.
So what are your thoughts on how the process differs when developing something like a Shiny app instead of a full package?
Yeah, so that's another thing I don't know much about. I've heard about some Shiny apps, but I barely know what they are. Probably that would be surprising to some people, but I'm pretty clueless about what a Shiny app even is. And I'm a bit old school. Like I'm very command line. I use Unix and I don't use RStudio, and so a lot of these like user graphical interface things I'm not really very good at. And so.
Okay, I think it's almost 1 o'clock and we've basically exhausted the list of questions. So perhaps maybe I'll thank you one more time, Matt, for a really interesting talk and for sticking around answering so many questions.
Thank you.
And for the audience, please join us next week on Thursday at 11 o'clock for the next public lecture, which is going to be delivered by Ivan Corwin. Thanks.